The hospital operations director made his joke at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening, right in front of the charge desk, right in front of the security cameras. He thought he was being clever. He thought the nurse standing across from him would flinch. She didn't flinch, and that was what cost him everything. Welcome to Quiet Badge's Stories. If you believe the most dangerous person in any room is often the quietest one, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Because the story I'm about to tell you didn't make the local news until 3 days later. And by then, 5 people were alive who shouldn't have been, and one director was facing federal charges he never saw coming. Wren Hadley had been working the night shift at Mercy Ridge Medical Center for 14 months. She was 38 years old, 5'4", with close-cropped dark hair and pale gray eyes that nurses twice her age said looked like they had already seen the worst thing imaginable and simply moved on. Her scrubs were always bright blue. Her badge said RN, her name, and a small Mercy Ridge lanyard, nothing else. She kept her locker clean, her charts precise, and her opinions mostly to herself. She had not always been quiet. But that was not the story she had brought to this hospital. That story lived elsewhere, in classified files and a call sign nobody at Mercy Ridge had ever heard spoken out loud. Conrad Ryle had been the director of hospital operations for 6 years. He was 51, broad-shouldered, and wore his administrative authority the way some men wore expensive cologne, heavily and in every room. He had never treated a patient in his life, but he had reorganized 2 billing departments and cut supply costs by 11% in 2022, and he reminded people of both facts at least once per shift change. Ryle did not dislike nurses. He simply did not think of them the way he thought of department heads. They were staffing units. They were line items with stethoscopes. Wren had filed 3 safety complaints in her 14 months at Mercy Ridge. Anonymous, properly formatted, submitted through the correct internal channels. One about understaffing in the trauma bay during weekend nights. One about a medication cart restocked with incorrect dosages twice in a single month. One about triage delays she had tracked herself in a small green notebook she kept in her left scrub pocket. Ryle had seen those complaints. He knew who filed them. He was not the kind of man who forgot that kind of thing. The night of April 3rd began with a tornado warning at 4:20 p.m., the kind of sky that turns the wrong color and makes cattle move without being told. By 6 o'clock, Mercy Ridge had activated its emergency protocol, called in available staff, and begun clearing discharge-ready patients from the trauma bay. The power grid in Caldwell County had been flickering since 5. The weather service said the cell was moving northeast at 40 miles per hour. At 6:44 p.m., the first radio call came in. A grain elevator on the east side of town had partially collapsed after a structural failure compounded by the storm. Workers trapped, multiple injuries, ETA of first ambulance, 8 minutes. The charge desk erupted. Dr. Nathan Farrow, the senior emergency physician on shift, was already pulling on gloves when Ryle appeared from the administrative corridor, tablet in hand, still in his blazer, moving with the energy of a man who had arrived to supervise rather than assist. He looked at the board, he looked at the staff, and then, in front of Dr. Farrow, 2 residents, the charge nurse, a paramedic waiting on a callback, and a security camera mounted above the supply station, Conrad Ryle pointed at Wren Hadley. "Let the night nurse run it," he said. He was almost smiling, since she has so many opinions about how this department should operate. Nobody laughed. Ryle didn't need them to. Dr. Farrow looked up. "Conrad, we have 5 critical inbounds." Then she should get started. Ryle adjusted his tablet under his arm. "I'll be observing from the administrative side. Full accountability. Board's been asking for it." He glanced at the camera above the supply station the way a man checks a mirror, making sure he looked good in it. Wren stood near the far end of the charge desk. She had been updating discharge notes when the call came in. She set down her pen. Her gray eyes moved to the board, then to the radio, then to the ambulance bay doors where rain had begun hammering the glass in long, flat sheets. "All right," she said. 2 syllables, the same way a pilot might say it before takeoff into weather. Petra, the second-floor nurse who had come down to assist, looked at her. "Who's coordinating?" "I am," Wren said. "Bay 1 for crush injury, Bay 2 for the chest, Bay 3 for the burns, Bay 4 for the laceration with hemorrhage, Bay 5 for whatever they call critical on the radio that turns out to be worse than that." The resident nearest the door said, "How do you know which is which?" "I don't yet, that's why Bay 5 exists." Dr. Farrow took a breath. He had been an emergency physician for 17 years. He had never heard a nurse triage a scene that hadn't arrived yet. He picked up his gloves. "What do you need from me?" "Keep Ryle out of the bays," Wren said. Behind her, Ryle said, "Excuse me?" Wren did not turn around. "You assigned this to me, Director. I'm assigning the work." The charge desk went very still. A monitor somewhere in the back hallway beeped 3 times and stopped. Then the ambulance bay doors burst open and the first stretcher came through on a wave of rain and shouting. and the particular urgency that only arrives with someone else's emergency. The man on the stretcher was 44 years old and had been pinned under a collapsed grain auger for 22 minutes. His left arm was the wrong shape. His abdomen was rigid. A paramedic named Dolan was calling vitals as they moved, and the numbers were sliding in the wrong direction. Wren was already at the stretcher before it reached Bay 1. What's his name? Roy Martin, foreman at the elevator. Roy. She placed 2 fingers on his wrist, found the pulse, noted its quality. You're at the hospital, we have you. She looked at Dolan. How long was pressure compromised? 11 minutes before we got a line. BP was 60 palp in the field. Wren looked at the resident beside her. Internal hemorrhage until proven otherwise. Do not let anyone move him for imaging until we have pressure above 90. Crossmatch and 2 large-bore IVs now. She paused. What's your name? The resident blinked. Miles. Miles, fast and clean, you can do this. He moved. His hands steadied in a way they hadn't been 30 seconds before. Petra noticed it. Ryle, watching from behind the glass of the administrative observation window, noticed it too, though he would not have been able to name what he was seeing. What he was seeing was someone who knew how to manage fear in other people. That was a specific skill. It did not come from nursing school. The second stretcher arrived before Bay 1 was secured. A woman in her mid-50s burns on both arms and her right shoulder from a flash fire near the elevator's conveyor belt, conscious, shaking. Her name was Carol, and she kept saying her husband's name, which was also somewhere in that elevator, status unknown. Wren stepped out of Bay 1, checked Carol's breathing, confirmed the burns were 2nd degree and not compromising her airway, and placed Petra with her with specific instructions that took 4 seconds to deliver. Then she moved to Bay 3, where a 26-year-old worker named Kevin had a chest injury that was turning the wrong shade of wrong. He came in breathing, Dolan said from the doorway. He's not breathing right now, Wren said not loud, just accurate. She put her hands on Kevin's chest, her eyes closed for exactly 1 second. She opened them. Tension pneumo left side. I need a 14-gauge, 2nd intercostal mid-clavicular now. Dr. Farrow appeared at her shoulder. I can do that. Then do it. He did. The chest decompressed. Kevin's color began to change. The monitor climbed in increments that felt like counting breaths in a dark room, each number a small relief. A nurse named Cal, one of the overnight techs, leaned close to Petra and said quietly, How does she know where everything is without looking? Petra said, She restocks the carts herself after every shift. But Cal had seen nurses restock carts before. That wasn't what he meant. What he meant was, the way Wren moved through a crisis was not the movement of someone who had learned emergency medicine in a classroom. It was the movement of someone who had learned it somewhere the classroom didn't exist, where getting it wrong meant someone died. And she had gotten it right 100 times over, and then brought that knowledge here and hidden it inside the frame of a charge desk and a 14-month employment record. At 7:09 p.m. the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout. The main grid dropped and took 3 full seconds to hand off to emergency power, and in those 3 seconds every monitor in every bay went dark and every person in the trauma department heard their own heartbeat. Emergency power returned in segments. Bay 1 came back first, Bay 2 second. Bay 3, where Kevin was breathing, came back with a stutter. Bay 4 stayed dark. Wren was already moving toward Bay 4 before anyone said anything. The patient in Bay 4 was a 67-year-old woman named Dorothea Wynn. She had been working in the elevator's administrative office, a grain inspector, retired from the state agricultural department, still taking freelance contracts, when the east wall gave way and the overhang came down across the parking lot. 3 broken ribs, a head laceration that had bled through 2 layers of gauze, a blood pressure that was trying its best and losing. When the lights came back in Bay 4, Dorothea Wynn was looking at the ceiling and breathing in a way that suggested each breath required a separate decision. Wren entered the bay, Mrs. Wynn. Dorothea, the woman said. Her voice was thin but precise, the voice of someone who had spent decades writing formal reports. Dorothea, I'm Wren, you're at Mercy Ridge, I need you to stay with me. I intend to, Dorothea said. Wren checked her pupils, checked her chest, placed her hand carefully along the woman's ribcage, and watched Dorothea's face instead of her own hand. Then she looked at the resident standing at the foot of the bed. Splinting, no compression on the left side. She needs a portable chest film before anyone touches that rib line again, and she needs it warm. Get her a second blanket before the tech comes in. The resident moved. Dorothea watched Wren work. After a moment she said, You have a particular way of standing. Wren glanced at her. Ma'am? My late husband stood that way, feet shoulder width, weight forward but not tense, ready. The old woman's eyes were clear despite everything. He was Army, 30 years. The room didn't go quiet exactly, but it changed. Cal heard it from the doorway. Petra heard it from the adjacent bay. Wren placed the second blanket over Dorothea's legs with steady hands. "Rest now," she said. "I'll come back." "You didn't answer." "No, ma'am." "You didn't have to." Wren held her gaze for 1 second. Then she turned and moved to Bay 5, where the 5th stretcher had just arrived, and the paramedic walking beside it looked like a man carrying more than a stretcher. The patient in Bay 5 was 11 years old. His name was Jake Oates. He had been in the parking lot of the grain elevator with his father. His father worked the night crew when the collapse happened. A section of corrugated metal siding had swept him off his feet and deposited him 30 yards away in a ditch with standing water. He had been found face down. He was conscious. That was the only good news. The rest of the picture was a collection of details that each meant something by themselves and meant something worse together. A bruise under his left ribs, a blood pressure trending down, a lac on the back of his head that had stopped bleeding too easily. Wren stood over him. "Hey." He looked at her. His eyes were the color of creek water. "I'm Wren, you're safe." "My dad," Jake said. "He's being looked for right now. People are working on that." "Is he okay?" Wren did not lie to children. She also did not fracture them. "We don't know yet. But I need you to stay here with me. Can you do that?" Jake looked at her for a long moment with the specific seriousness of a child who has learned that adults sometimes mean what they say. Then he nodded. "Good." She touched his wrist. "You're doing your job." "What job?" "Staying here." Ryle appeared in the doorway of Bay 5. He had come down from the observation window. His blazer was still pressed. His expression was the expression of a man who has been watching someone else succeed at something he assigned as a punishment and is trying to locate the problem with that. "Nurse Hadley," he said, "I need a status report for administration." Wren did not look up. Bay 1 stable pending imaging. Bay 2 under control, 1st and 2nd degree burns, no airway compromise. Bay 3 decompressed, breathing on his own. Bay 4 broken ribs, needs chest film. Bay 5, I'm here right now. You are performing beyond your scope. Then go find someone within scope and send them down. Ryle's jaw moved. You need to understand. Director Ryle. Dr. Farrow appeared behind him. His white coat had blood on the left cuff. His voice was quieter than usual, which made it heavier. We have 5 patients alive right now. 3 of them are alive specifically because of what she did in the last 40 minutes. I suggest you take your status report back upstairs. Ryle looked at the security camera mounted in the corner of Bay 5. He looked at it the way a man looks at a witness he has not considered. He stepped back. What happened at 7:34 p.m. was not something anyone expected. Jake's blood pressure dropped without warning. A sharp decline that had no counterpart in his previous vitals. The kind of drop that means something has been holding and has decided to stop. His monitor alarmed, and the sound was different from the usual alarms. Shorter, more urgent, the way a car horn sounds different when you hear it from inside the vehicle. Wren called for neuroconsult before anyone else in the room understood what she was calling for. Cal said, he's a trauma patient, not. His pupils changed in the last 3 minutes, Wren said. Left is slower than right. Get me neuro. The neurosurgeon on call was on the 2nd floor. He came down still holding his coffee. He looked at Jake's chart. He looked at the monitor. Then he looked at Wren with the expression of a man recalibrating. Where did you see the pupil change? I've been checking every 6 minutes. Who told you to check every 6 minutes? I decided to check every 6 minutes. He said, delayed intracranial bleed. We need him up. Then he looked at her again differently. You caught this in a window that might be less than 15 minutes wide. Wren said, then let's not use them talking. They moved Jake to neurosurgery through a hallway, lit by emergency strips, and the glow of people doing their jobs precisely under pressure. Wren walked the gurney to the elevator and stood at the closing doors with the particular stillness of someone who has handed something important to someone else and must now trust the outcome. Cal stood beside her. He was 24 years old and had worked at Mercy Ridge for 8 months and had never seen a night like this one. Are you all right? He asked. Check Roy's vitals, she said, and make sure someone is with Carol. He went. She turned back to the board. At 8:02 p.m., the administrative corridor door opened and 2 men in wet dress uniforms walked through the trauma bay like they owned the weather outside. Behind them came a woman in a dark jacket, with a federal ID visible at her waist. Ryle was at the charge desk reviewing something on his tablet. He looked up. This area is restricted to Ullarized personnel, said the woman. She held up her badge. Special Agent Tara Monks, Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. We're here on a concurrent matter. Her eyes found Wren at the patient board, and possibly a related one. Ryle blinked. What concurrent matter? Mercy Ridge has had 4 unexpected patient deaths in the last 10 months, Monk said. 3 of them occurred during documented staffing shortages in this department. We've been building the file for 6 weeks. She paused. Someone filed 5 anonymous safety alerts that gave us the thread to pull. The charge desk held its breath. Ryle looked at Wren. He understood before she said anything. You could see it move through him. Those alerts were filed improperly, he said. Wren looked at him. They were filed correctly. You marked them unresolved and buried them in the risk management queue. You don't have standing to. A woman named Paulette Graves was 62 years old, Wren said. She waited 48 minutes for a respiratory therapist during an asthma exacerbation because you had moved both overnight therapists to cover a board luncheon upstairs. She was found unresponsive at 11:20 p.m. The incident report said no deviation from standard care. Wren set down her marker. I read that report 17 times. No one in the room moved. The taller of the 2 uniformed men stepped forward. Silver hair, the kind of posture that rooms respond to before the person speaks. Colonel Frank Ossie, United States Army. We're here on a parallel track. His eyes found Wren with the precision of someone who has been looking for a person they already know. Sergeant Hadley. The room forgot how to breathe. Dr. Farrow whispered, Sergeant? The second officer answered, 18th Special Forces Group, 18 Delta. Army Special Operations Combat Medic, 4 deployments, Distinguished Service Cross, Meritorious Service Medal, Classified Exfiltration Operations redacted by JSOC order, call sign Ghost. He paused. She left the Army 22 months ago. Ryle actually laughed, a short, high sound with no humor in it. That is not possible. Wren removed her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard container. Why not? You're a night nurse. I'm both. Agent Monks opened a folder. We flagged her service record 2 weeks ago when her anonymous alert language matched Army medical after-action report formats. Specific terminology, specific structure. Nobody outside that background writes incident reports quite the same way. She looked at Ryle. We were nearby tonight because of the federal review. The rest of this, she gestured at the trauma bay, at the board with 5 names on it, all marked stable, was not what we expected to find. Ryle straightened his blazer. Whatever her background, she performed procedures beyond her nursing authorization. That is a liability issue. That is a scope violation. Everything she did tonight will be reviewed, Wren said. Good. Review it. Review the emergency airway I established in Bay 3 because the attending was 30 seconds away and the patient had 6 seconds left. Review the hemorrhage control in Bay 1 because the trauma surgeon was still gloved up from the previous shift. Review every decision I made and every second it took. She looked at the security camera above the supply station. The red recording light blinked steadily. Review everything. Ryle looked at the camera too. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has already tried to neutralize. Agent Monks's phone buzzed. She read the screen. Director Ryle, the security footage from the charge desk camera between 6:40 and 7:15 p.m. was deleted from the hospital server at 7:52 tonight. The temperature in the room changed. Dr. Farrow said, What? Someone accessed the recording system from an administrative terminal and removed 42 minutes of footage. Monks looked at Ryle. The same terminal you logged into at 7:49, according to the access log. Ryle said, I want legal counsel. That seems wise, Monks said. In the meantime, I'll tell you what we still have. She held up a different tablet. Mercy Ridge installed body cameras on all paramedic units last February. A condition of the county EMS contract. Paramedic Dolan was wearing his when he came through those doors at 6:52 p.m. She turned the screen toward the room. The footage was clear, the light was clear, and Conrad Ryle was clear. Blazer, tablet, and all. Pointing at Wren Hadley in front of the charge desk and saying the words he had said, and grinning. Petra covered her mouth. Cal said something quiet that probably shouldn't have been said in a hospital. Ryle took 1 step toward Monks's tablet, fast with his hand out. Wren moved faster. She stepped between him and Monks in a single precise movement, her left hand catching his wrist and redirecting his momentum into the wall beside the supply station. He hit it shoulder first. He did not fall, but he stopped. Completely, pinned at an angle that suggested the wall was the kindest available option. She held him there with 1 hand and no visible effort. Ryle said, You assaulted me. I stopped evidence tampering, Wren said. There's a difference. Monks nodded to the 2 agents behind her. They moved with the efficiency of people who have cuffed angrier men in smaller rooms. When they walked Ryle out through the administrative corridor, he passed Dr. Farrow, who stepped aside without a word. He passed Petra, who did not look at him. He passed Dorothea Wynn's Bay, where the old woman had heard the commotion and turned her head toward the hallway. With the calm assessment of someone who has been around long enough to recognize when a particular kind of person finally meets the particular kind of wall they have been building toward. She looked at Wren as Ryle passed. "Army," she said. Wren said, "Yes, ma'am." Dorothea nodded once. "Good." At 9:11 p.m., neurosurgery called down. Jake Oates was out of the OR. The bleed had been evacuated. Critical but stable. His father, found conscious in the collapsed east section of the elevator with 2 broken legs and a punctured lung, was already on the 2nd floor in surgery of his own. Nobody told Jake yet. He was sedated. But when Dr. Farrow came to stand beside Wren at the board and relay the news, she was quiet for a moment before writing Jake's status update, and Farrow had enough sense not to say anything. Colonel Ossie came to stand beside her when Farrow moved away. "You always did hate being found," he said. "I wasn't hiding." "No." Wren looked at the board. 5 names. "I was resting." Ossie's face did something complicated. "Rest is allowed." "Not tonight." He studied her for a moment. "Why did you leave it out of your file?" The discharge summary listed administrative review. "Nothing about why you actually." "I started remembering the ones I couldn't get to before I remembered the ones I did," she said. "That's not a condition. It's just a weight. I needed somewhere to set it down for a while." Ossie said nothing. Wren said, "A hospital is still a mission." He looked at the board. "All 5 names. I see that now." By midnight, federal agents were in administration. Ryle's access cards had been deactivated. The board's outside counsel had arrived looking pale and purposeful. Someone had printed a still frame from the paramedic body cam footage and taped it to the administrative bulletin board with the word accountability above it in Sharpie. Wren took it down. She did not know who put it up. She suspected Cal. In the family consultation room, Carol from Bay 2 was on the phone with her daughter. Her husband had been found in the elevator rubble, alive with a broken collarbone and an unbroken determination to file a very large insurance claim. Roy Martin from Bay 1 had been moved to the ICU stable. Kevin from Bay 3 was breathing on his own. Dorothea Wynne had, per Petra's account, asked 3 separate staff members for decaf coffee and ranked their responses by response time. At 1:20 a.m., Agent Monks found Wren at the charge desk. "We need a formal statement. You can have it after I finish my shift documentation." Monks looked at her. "It's past 1 in the morning." "Chart accuracy prevents the next disaster," Wren said. "The statement can wait 40 minutes. Monks almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Dr. Farrow came to Wren's side as Monks walked away. He looked like a man who had been carrying something all night and was only now understanding how heavy it was. "I owe you an apology," he said. Wren kept writing. "Yes. I let Ryle make that joke happen. I should have." "You helped when I asked." She looked up. "That matters more than the joke." "I should have stopped him before it got to a joke." She considered that. "Yes," she said again, but differently. "You should have." He nodded. The acknowledgement sat between them without resolution, which was the honest place for it. At 4:45 a.m., the Federal Compliance Review had produced 3 specific findings that Ryle's attorney was already calling procedural. The compliance officer had provided copies of 17 internal safety reviews closed without action. Paulette Graves's family had been contacted. A patient advocate had been reached by phone. The board met without Ryle at 5 a.m. Wren was present because Monks brought her. The board chairman tried to thank her. She told him the 4 things that actually needed to change, named them plainly, and said she would file formal written recommendations by the end of the week. The chairman said the board would consider them. Wren said she would follow up every 7 days until they did. Colonel Ossie, watching from a chair near the door, said nothing. He looked like a man watching something he had seen before in different rooms and different uniforms. Always the same gravity, the specific weight of a person who has decided to stay in a fight. When the meeting ended and Ossie walked beside Wren back toward the ER, he said, "You know they'll push a formal leadership title on you now. They can't ignore what happened." "I don't want a title." "What do you want?" Wren pushed open the door to the ER. Early light was coming gray through the ambulance bay windows. Tessa, the day shift lead, was coming in with a coffee in each hand and eyes that went wide when she saw the state of the department, then wider still when Petra pulled her aside to give her the summary. Cal was updating the overnight log. Dr. Farrow was handing off to the incoming physician with the exhaustion of a man who has learned something irreversible in the night and is still working out what to do with it. Wren looked at the board. 5 names, all still there, all still stable. "I want better staffing ratios," she said, "and I want the safety alert system to go directly to the compliance officer, not through administration." Ossie said, "That's 2 things. That's 2 things that would have saved Paulette Graves." He didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer. 6 weeks later, Mercy Ridge Medical Center posted 4 new policy commitments above the charge desk. No patient goes unseen within 10 minutes of arrival. No staff member faces retaliation for filing a safety concern. No administrative directive overrides clinical triage judgment. And the fourth, which Dorothea Wynne had written on a note card and mailed to the department from her recovery at home. The person closest to the patient usually knows the most. Wren had objected to it being posted. It was, she said, not a policy but a principle. Petra posted it anyway. Nobody argued with Petra. Ryle pled no contest to evidence tampering and administrative fraud 8 weeks after the tornado. The Paulette Graves case was reopened by the state health department. 2 other mortality reviews were flagged for revision. The board chairman resigned before the federal report was finalized. On the morning the plea became public, Wren arrived at Mercy Ridge for the night shift the same way she always had. She parked in the same spot. She walked in through the ambulance bay. She clocked in at 6:58 p.m., 2 minutes before her shift started. Cal was at the desk. He handed her the overnight update without being asked. Petra was finishing her handoff notes. Dr. Farrow, who had started requesting the overnight shift 3 times a week, looked up when she came in and gave her a nod that meant more than it would have 2 months ago. The board above the charge desk showed 3 patients, 1 chest pain, 1 laceration, 1 pediatric fever. All seen, all charted, all receiving the kind of care that does not require someone with a classified file and a call sign to force the issue. Wren picked up her marker. She wrote the first update of her shift in clean block letters. Cal watched her and said, "Quiet night." "It's 7 p.m., Wren said. "Right, never mind." She looked at the board for a moment, then at the ambulance bay doors, where the April sky had gone clear after weeks of difficult weather, and the light coming through the glass was the particular gold of a day that had nothing left to prove. She clipped her badge to her scrubs, her name, the Mercy Ridge lanyard. Nothing else, nothing that needed to be there. Because the people who mattered already knew what the badge didn't say, and the people who didn't know yet would figure it out, the same way everyone eventually figures out the same thing about the quiet ones. They are not quiet because they have nothing to say. They are quiet because they are spending that energy on something more important than being heard.